Welcome everyone to our Bicep community call of April 2023. Here's our team. Not much has changed, so I'm going to skip over this. Car maintainers, we're still very, very excited to have you guys. Alex and I met Simon in person this past week. That was really exciting. We met a lot of our users. Very, very exciting. What the community call is for. If you are new here, it's for you guys, not us. This allows you to get updates on topics we might not otherwise cover in our own calls and content. And we have new announcements and feature reveals here. So this will be the first place every month to go to. Please use the chat. We have all of our engineers and our PMs in the chat answering any questions. But you can also raise your hand during the call itself or at the end during our questions and answers. Okay. Get started, Alex.
Okay, for the O.17 release that aspirationally will be out on May 1st. The first one, if you've been playing around with the Bicep param file format, the new style of doing Bicep parameters, AZ PowerShell support is now enabled. So all that means is if you deploy with PowerShell, when you use the dash parameters file flag, you can pass it a .bicep param file instead of having to transpile it yourself before the deployment. So that's just a nice little convenience. We got some partial maintainer, partial external contributions with this one, load YAML content. Thank you to those that worked on it. This basically works just like the load JSON content. So if you have a YAML Kubernetes manifest, or you have YAML for whatever other reason, you can now load that into a native Bicep object with this function. So that's just a nice little convenience. This is a bit of a contrived example here, but gives you a sense of what's possible. Number 3, we relaxed type checking for BCP 334 and BCP 335. Basically what happened there is with, I think it was O.16.1, possibly O.16.2, we introduced these new warnings, which would check length restrictions amongst other things. I know I'm really butchering the explanation here, but basically we would emit these warnings that you couldn't resolve yourself. It's something that we could identify in the compiler, but you couldn't do anything about it. So we relaxed the constraints here a little bit so you don't get these warnings that you can't do anything about. And then there's another experimental feature that we took the experimental flag off of. So number 4, private registry completions. Basically, if you do BR:, we will attempt to look up whatever ACR instances you have access to. So it doesn't filter out or doesn't know if it has Bicep content or does not have Bicep content. It's just a registry that you have access to based on the Azure credentials that you're signed into. So if you do BR:, we'll do a request to pull all these container registries. Just makes the IntelliSense experience a little better for registries, which you'll continue to see us working on. For future releases, only some minor changes here. So last month, for whatever reason, custom types wasn't on here, but it should have been. So that we think will happen in the O.18 release, as well as Bicep parameters file. We're going to make it so you don't need to opt in Bicep config. It'll just be enabled for everyone. So both of those should be available in the next release. For O.19, we haven't really gone through and determined exactly what we're going to release there, but nothing super major coming down the pipe for that release that at least we were aware of. And then the Microsoft Graph Provider, it's almost in the next 2 releases on the left there, but not quite. So maybe optimistically it'll be sometime in July. So we're saying it's going to be part of the O.20 release. And then the last 2 columns, O.star and 1.0, nothing major changed there. Although, actually, I should say dynamic type updates, we have started working on that a little more intently recently. So we'll have some more specific updates on that soon.
Great, thanks, Alex. Johnny?
Okay. Let's see. I'll share my screen, but did you say at the beginning I shouldn't use the PowerPoint share?
I think it should be, it might be easier if you could do it this way, for those on Android. But it's really up to you. Then we could just, they could just watch the recording after. Whatever works best for you.
Okay. I'm still gonna do the PowerPoint thing just because I have notes and I know where they show up here.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to try to cover this briefly. One feature that we've been looking at a lot is how to share values between templates. So a lot of users who have been experimenting with custom types have asked for this. Basically, what this means is you want to be able to define your types in one place, like a types.bicep file, and then pull it into other templates as needed with some kind of like import export syntax. So I'm going to go through like a few options for the syntax that we've been looking at, and then in the chat do like a quick straw poll to get people's hot takes on what they like or don't like. Before we get to the options, there are a couple of things that are going to be true of all of the options. So types in any template, they're going to be private by default. And there will be an explicit keyword that you need to use to identify what is shareable. We don't know exactly what that keyword will be, but it'll be something like export, share, or public. One other thing that's going to be true of all of these options is that this feature will be implemented as a compile time macro. So it's something that will get processed in Bicep and then won't be detectable by the ARM engine. So there will be no runtime difference between reusing a symbol and declaring it, like just duplicating the declaration in your template. And one other thing, at least for the initial release, is that this is going to require its own opt-in because we're still experimenting with the syntax, and that would be above and beyond, opting in to user-defined types. Okay, so with that said, let's pop over to some options. I'm going to show you guys 3 of these and just give you a few notes on each, and then see what questions you have. So option 1 is just go with a full new statement. So the example on the right is not necessarily the keyword that we would use, but it's probably the one we would use. So we would say import and then open curly braces, and then whatever symbols you want to import from a different target. So each symbol that you can import would be, you'd be allowed to rename that using this as keyword, like you see another as kooks. And then the string that follows from could be a local file, it could be a registry module. Any Bicep template would be valid there. If we didn't go with the import keyword, some alternatives that we've looked at are include and use. If you guys are familiar with TypeScript, this option should look very familiar. Okay, popping over to option 2. So one other thing that we can do, or actually I should say really quickly on option 1, one thing that's making this choice a little more difficult is we already have an import statement, and it's used for the Bicep extensibility feature. So if we go with option 1, one implication of this is that we're probably going to have to rename the existing import statement to something like provider. Okay. So another option is that we can merge this like compile time macro with the existing extensibility provider import statement. This So the example you say, you just say import and then give it the name of a template. Again, either local file or registry module. One thing that we're still not sure about is we may have to require a modifier, like say import static, because there are some cases where the compiler won't be able to tell if you're trying to pull in an extensibility provider or exported symbols. And if this is happening when you're importing an OCI artifact, so something in a registry, whether the compiler can make that determination would change based on the contents of what's in the registry, which is not a great experience if like your template compiles one day and then breaks the next. So we might have to require static in cases of ambiguity or to prevent that kind of like drift from unambiguous to ambiguous, just require it all the time. One good thing about this format is that like namespace-based resolution would work. So if you wanted to use a symbol from foo.bicep, you could refer to the namespace as and then a symbol in it. So on line 3, you say that the bar param is of type foo.bar. And because this is a namespace variable, if you don't have anything else named bar in your template, the namespace qualifier would not be required. So yeah, you would only need to fully qualify if there was some ambiguity there. One potential thing to watch out for there is if you're importing two separate templates, and they both define symbols that you can import, and one of them adds a symbol that conflicts with the name that you're already using from the other template, that is again something that could break your template. So we might have to encourage people to use fully qualified symbols all the time. Okay, and then one last thing to consider with this format is it's pretty terse, because you just say import and then give it the name or the path to which you're importing. But one thing that we've gone back and forth on is it clear that nothing's going to get deployed from that template? Because it looks like you're importing the whole thing, but really it's just the exported symbols, and we're just doing it at compile time. So that's a consideration there. Okay. And the third option is very similar to the last option, but instead of merging with the import statement, merge it with the module statement. So module is already, it's the Bicep mechanism for code reuse, and there's a lot of conceptual similarity there between like reusing some symbols that you defined in one Bicep template versus reusing some resources that you defined in one Bicep template. We would need to have some kind of helper keyword. So on the right, you see const is stuck in front of module to distinguish between those two cases. And then, like with what we saw in option 2, because this is actually option 3, and I didn't, yeah, okay. Imagine this is option 3 at the top. But one thing, so like what we saw in option 2, you only have to supply the namespace if there's ambiguity. And then also, like with option 2, there's a concern like, is it clear that none of the resources from that module will be deployed and only exported symbols will come in? Okay, so I know I went through that pretty quickly. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them either right now or in the chat. And I'm going to put option 1, 2, and 3 in the chat just as messages. And if you particularly like one, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you particularly don't like one, give it a thumbs down. And with that, I will hand back control.
There are some questions you may want to keep presenting for a little bit, Johnny.
Oh, sure. Let me see.
Well, there's at least one. So what's the complexity of renaming the existing import for extensibility?
I wouldn't call that complexity. Extensibility is still in preview, so while there are some people who might be preview users who would need to update their templates, we're not really concerned about making a breaking change there. Basically, we would just go in the parser and say, instead of looking for the word import, you're now looking for the word provider. It's a pretty small change.
Yeah, and I think because extensibility is still opt-in right now, it's easier to do that now than later.
Okay, and
Go ahead.
I also saw Vic asked what is considered a symbol. So right now we're really focusing on types because that seems to be the clear need. But we also want to look at using a similar mechanism for potentially sharing variables across templates if they can be fully determined at compile time, so they don't rely on like parameters or anything that we would only know when deploying the template. And one other thing that we've looked at that would potentially be shareable is user-defined functions. This is something you can do in ARM that Anthony has been working on adding to Bicep in preview. So for now, we'll just say types, but there are other classes of symbols that could be shared in this way in the future.
And then there's one more for option 1. Is it possible to import the entire file without brackets?
Yeah, I didn't include that. I'll just put it in the chat. So that would probably look a lot like TypeScript, where we would say import star as, and then give a simple name.
I think those are all the questions. Am I missing any more, Alex? Are you missing any more?
I don't see any.
Cool. We do have a good
Okay.
amount of topics today, so sorry,
Yeah,
Johnny.
thank you. Oh no,
Thank
the
you.
only thing I wanted to say is like this is not binding, but thank you for your input, and we'll take that up in discussion. Thanks.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
Johnny,
everyone.
it sounds like the plan is to implement it as a new experimental feature. So whatever we end up deciding, we'll have opportunities to play around with it and see how it feels.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. And I guess for sake of the recording, we have a lot of people voting for option 1 and no one voting for 2 and 3. Okay. We can move on to our next topic. Stephen, do you want to also take over?
Okay. There we go. I just have a fairly quick question. Of course, that's what we always say. We discussed a few months ago setting some default levels for the linter rules that wasn't just simply always warning. Hadn't been implemented yet because I wanted to make sure people could deal with breaking changes, and specifically I plan on implementing these, but also this during the next sprint. So being able to set a default level, which you could set to off or air, whatever. So you could set it to off if you want to not be affected by new rules, for instance. I have one question related to this, though, and that's that the proposal here was for security errors to default to error rather than warning. So two questions about that. Just wanted to make sure. I have mixed feelings about whether any linter rules should default to error. There are 4 of them that we know will cause deployment errors, so those will default to error. The security ones, I'm less sure. Also, if they default to error, that will be a breaking change. So essentially the question is simply, should they default to error or should they default to warnings? And let me put those down here as well. So if you could vote on that, appreciate it. If I don't get any responses, I will leave it as error, like in the current proposal. And I'm seeing lots of thumbs up on warning. So unless that changes, that's what I'll go with. Thanks. That's all I had.
Jumping in real fast, is there any chance that could be configured such that if there are certain linter rules that are particularly important, to some organization, that there could be a setting or something that specifically does override the warning and call them as an error?
I mean, yeah, I mean, you can override any linter rule specifically, individually, and set a level
Right.
in the Bicep config file. Is that what you meant, or you mean something
Yeah,
else?
exactly. Yeah, because I would vote they should all just be warning that by default, linter rules shouldn't ever break the build. But I can also see there being some rules, can't think of any offhand, but some rules that are important enough. For example, the I don't know, the Bicep build shouldn't contain what looks to be a password, right? You shouldn't contain secrets in the thing, and so something like that says, don't allow secrets. That itself should override the default and throw an error instead.
So like this contains some similar rules. Output shouldn't contain secrets. It's a heuristic rule, so it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But those
Yeah,
are
it's
related.
largely based on does the name
Yeah.
say secrets? But if something like that though, right? If I had like a richer thing that says I don't know, it looks like I'm defining or I don't know, creating a password or something, or providing a value for a password field and using a deterministic thing. Not a great way to generate passwords, something like that I would
Right.
want to prevent that from necessarily being checked in or built against, and mark that as an error. But again, by default, everything else should be a warning.
Okay, so it looks, I mean, it was overwhelming in support of warning instead of error. So 15 votes for warning, 1 for error. What I would like, so for the moment, you can do that just by explicitly marking those rules as error. What I would love to go in the future is to have the ability to specify defaults per category. So you could say security rules default to error. There are some other things that we've considered that are bugs in here. So if you're interested in, I'm not sure if that one's there, I'll enter one for it. So if you have specific requests like that, please do go ahead and enter them as issues and vote them up. Does that sound good for now?
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. I found out that Stephanie's Wi-Fi went out, so I am now responsible for the slides. The next one up is Mohammed, Powershell Params update. I don't know if you have anything to present or if there's anything on the slides. Okay.
I'm gonna just present. It's like a 2-minute presentation, not long. Okay. So hey everyone. So we have wait 1 second, sorry. Okay. So we have added the Powershell. Last community call we showed you the support for Bicep Params for AZ CLI, and this time we have added the support for Powershell as well. So basically, for those who are not familiar with Params file, so basically we created a way to create parameters files for Bicep templates using the Bicep syntax, and this is what it looks like. So this is a params file, and for each params file, you need to point it to a Bicep template. So we're gonna point it to this template, and then this has 2 parameters. So we're gonna just quickly define those 2 parameters. Use the param keyword, and yep, S2, right, and all right. So we have our parameters now, and we have our parameters file ready. So we're gonna go ahead and deploy this using the Azure Powershell command. So initially you had to like build this and then deploy the JSON parameters file, but now you can just directly use this file with the template. So this is the command. So and the argument it takes in this file is template parameter file. So instead of having to provide the JSON file here like this, you can just provide the Bicep parameters file. So we're gonna do that, and it's gonna run the deployment. It'll take like a second or two. And just while that's going, for parameters file, it's currently experimental, so you do need to enable it in the Bicep config like this. And as you can see, the deployment was successful. Yeah. If anybody has any questions, let me know.
Cool. Thanks, Mohammed. Definitely exciting to see this working.
I've got a quick question about that. Is that params file going to have the ability to guess what the params we need in there? So if it's like a required parameter from the original Bicep file, will it know that and say, hey, we need to add those in there?
Yes. It's gonna, if you don't provide a required parameter, then it would ask you to, it would actually, for now, we actually have it as, we won't even say, like, it won't even let you do the build if you don't have the required value. So you need all the required values.
Following up on that too, it had at the top of it using
Yeah, let me show you.
main.bicep.
Yeah, let me show you.
I'm
So
sorry.
let's go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so I guess just on my mind, using main.bicep, is that, I guess, referencing from the Bicep param, which file, I guess, is like the entry point for it, which one is providing the parameters to?
Yeah, so this basically like links the parameters file to Bicep file, and this we're doing this for validation and also for like just making sure that you are able to like get the correct parameters in, right? So for in this one, you need to provide the location, and let's say if I take this out, it will start complaining, and you can't even compile this. So you have to provide all the parameters, and it would tell you that which parameters you need. So if I type the parameter keyword,
Can this be generated? So like if I give it a main.bicep, can I run something that will generate a param.bicep param that I can then modify from that point forward?
yes, that feature is also in works. So that would be out with the first parameters release, and we also are gonna work on a decompiler feature where you're gonna be able to use let's say a JSON parameters file and turn it into a Bicep param. So you're gonna have multiple ways to experiment around with your existing files and turn them into parameters. This new Bicep parameters file.
Right. Will it also support custom types?
I don't think so. That's part of the first release yet, but likely in the second release.
That's fine.
I believe
Eventual
the
support's
custom type
nice.
I believe the custom type should work, Mohammed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yep.
Garo, did you have a question?
Yeah, for the Bicep parameters, can you do variables and functions and calculations in there too, or is it just strictly for declarative values?
Yeah, you can do expressions. So yeah, you should be able to do. Actually, yeah, that's right. You should be able to do that.
Cool.
Um,
Thanks.
Any other questions from anyone?
But the parameter file should only contain parameters and variables. No modules.
no, not
Correct.
Okay.
Can it reference multiple bicep files? So like this one just says main.bicep. Could you potentially say, I don't know, if especially since, you know, I guess at least one of the linter rules suggests that you shouldn't pass location between them all, or at least pull it straight off the resource group, that it should be provided as a parameter with a default value.
Well, if there's like
could you,
submodules, is that what you're talking about? Like if you have 3 different bicep files, like modules, you could use the same
Yeah.
parameter file for all of them?
yeah, or you just have a lot more than that? I mean, I guess would you have to list them all at the top of this thing to, you know, from there provide the location for each of those, or is there some I don't know, wildcard support or something?
Mm,
Our intention was to start strict on this one and have it be tied 1-to-1. I think where we could use some help is better understanding the cases where you have several bicep files that can all use the same parameters. I think we understand the reverse, where you might have multiple parameters files, like a prod and dev set of parameters for a particular bicep file, but we're struggling to understand when the reverse is relevant. We're not saying it's not valid, we just don't understand it well enough at this point.
Sure. I think I'm gonna have to play around with it, because I guess the idea is that you have multiple bicep param files for, like you said, different environments, dev, test, and whatnot, right?
Right.
So you could easily sub them in.
Yeah, just like today. So the same way that you could have a prod or a dev JSON parameters file today, you could do that with bicep params as well.
I mean, yeah, that would at least simplify mine. I have, unfortunately, dev and prod modules, so that just being able to pull these out, and instead of just having a wall of exports from one module would be nice.
Cool.
Would it be possible to run multiple parameter files against a single main?
As in, like, to get parameter A, B, and C from one file and DEF from another file?
Yeah, now for example, you mentioned different environments, so something like location is probably shared between all of those. So you would have all the shared and common ones in a single one, and then you would only run the dev one, for example, with the specific. Yeah, but for bicep.
This is definitely something we're thinking about for the next release, but I think we haven't really closed on the specifics of how parameters should be shared between files.
Can you do
so if people have ideas there, then sorry, go on.
Can you do an include in a parameter file? So in other words, reference, have a parameter file that has your location information, and then say include location. Include environment.
I think that's one of the approaches we're interested in exploring. Kind of like how, you know, being able to pull in parameters from different files. I think the other approach would just be having one parameter file like that either doesn't have a using statement associated with it, or just can be shared between different files.
Yeah, because the include files obviously couldn't use the using statement, because it would be used in multiple ones.
Yeah, but I think in cases where that could be really valuable are, for example, like, you know, you have like your environment name, and you build a whole bunch of other parameters based off that environment name. Like you use string interpolation or expression functions to do things with that environment name. That way you can kind of minimize repetition.
Yeah, and if you look at TerraGrunt, that's that whole concept, right? That you have a folder structure with, you know, a level that's your environment, a level that's your location, and then the level that's the object you're deploying. TerraGrunt reads up the tree to say, you know, oh, grab this file. And so the end vars file is a combination of directory 1, directory 2, and then the thing in the actual object. So that concept of an include statement makes this really, really nice. But that if you're doing the include, you can't do any, you can't use a using statement.
Yep.
I was just going to throw in a use case that my team has come across. We're basically doing composition of parameter files, doing sort of fake parameter files with Bicep right now, where we have, like, for example, an app gateway where there's a shared resource that has some common parameters that everybody needs to know about. Then there's some things that are very specific to one team or one project, and so we don't want them to have to go wade through 1,000 line file. And so being able to do includes to say, okay, like, here's the stuff that's shared, here's the stuff that's your stuff, here's the stuff that's your stuff, would make it much easier to manage that.
Yeah, I think we will definitely need to do some sort of composition capability. So we will keep you all posted with what the potential designs could look like for this.
Yep, and we'd also love to get some kind of mock-ups or example use cases from you in the Bicep issue. Mohammed, I don't know if we have a link to the specific Bicep issue for this, or we could just put it in the second release.
Yeah, there's no. I think there's. I think we put this. We did discuss this, like hierarchical or like composition capability. It's not in the first piece for sure, but I can share the link. And you guys can also create issues and just tag them with the. So tag any issues with the, let's say, you tag any issues with this, the story Bicep parameters, and then I'll take a look at it. So if you have any ideas on how you want that to work, just tag with this. I think somebody have their hand up.
Yeah, hi. I was just curious if the use of Bicep parameter files will still allow other parameters to be fed in addition via the CLI like we can with JSON today.
In the first release, it's not
use like a wrapper script.
Yeah, in the first release, it's not going to be possible. We are strict on that too, to have all the parameters in the Bicep param file. But we are thinking we may end up needing to relax that. So if you can share kind of your typical process in that link that I shared in the chat and how you'd want that to be enabled, that would be helpful as well.
Sure, thanks. I think the addition of the MS Graph AAD stuff would eliminate that for us.
Oh, really? That if you could do that in the Bicep file, you wouldn't need to pass it in as a command line argument?
Yeah, basically we're using wrapper scripts to interact with AAD and then pass in group identifiers for like IAM entitlements.
Got it. Okay, that's great context.
Thanks.
Garo?
Yes, this kind of command line thing kind of struck me, because how would we pass secrets if we need to pass secrets into this?
So
personally, I use Key Vault.
Yeah, so we are looking
right, but if let's say we're setting up Key Vault for sure, but if there's some things where we.
So I have like a permanent Key Vault that I use. So for anything that needs to be persistent between deployments, because then you can just reference that as a existing resource, and it lives throughout. And so if you need to generate something, you can put in that Key Vault. If you need to reference it in another deployment, still use that same Key Vault, but it's something that exists outside of any individual system, so that you're not storing those secrets in these files.
How do you bootstrap the first one?
Not using Bicep. AZ Key Vault, add secrets.
Well, the other thing to be clear about here is like we do understand the need to be able to pass arguments in. So we are going to be thinking about that. We're going to be thinking we are going to be supporting environmental variables for the first release as well. So you'll be able to read environmental variables in your Bicep param file. So that's one possibility, is using environmental variables. Another possibility is, as I said, we'll be thinking about how to pass in parameters to the parameters file in the long run as well.
Cool. I think we should move on to the next topic. I don't think Stephanie is back yet.
I'm Nicole.
Oh, hey, Stephanie.
But I can't share the screen.
Do you want me, Stephanie, to share the feedback link?
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to drop a link into the chat. If you have any thoughts on Bicep parameters and what you want to be in the second release or things that we should prioritize, please do fill out this form that I just sent into the chat. If you have tried it, that's ideal, and sharing your experience of what it's been like so far. But if you haven't tried it out and you're learning about it today, or you have thoughts on the design, feel free to fill out the survey as well.
Alex, is there any chance you could change the survey to make the text boxes larger than one line?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, never mind. And just paste it in.
Just for context for this one, our first release is coming out on June 1st. And that will be, we're taking off the experimental flag from there. So we're looking into what we want to include in the second release. And in the last community call, we got some feedback of wanting to support key vault or inheritance. So we thought that this would be a good place for users to be able to tell us what you might want in the second release. And we could make any decisions there by the end of the first release. Yeah.
Cool. Let's go on to the next topic. Sorry, I'm not sharing because I think everyone that's up is going to have to present themselves. But Hadwa, did you want to give an update on environment variables support in Bicep Param, since we were just talking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just let me share my screen quickly. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So this is just update on the being able to support reading or loading values from environment variables in Bicep. Basically, this feature will make it possible, but only on the scope of the Bicep param files, which means if you are using JSON to supplement or support or pass your values for the parameters that you have defined in your Bicep modules, you will not be able to use this function because we don't have it supported there. The proposal of the feature is basically, so we'll make it happen by enabling a function that's called read environment variable. This is basically a proposal for the syntax that it will look like. You would be able to call this function from your Bicep param file, pass the name of the environment variable that you are trying to read or load the value from, and then you could basically assign it to a parameter that you has already defined in your main Bicep file. So this is basically the syntax for you to be able to set the value for this parameter from an environment variable on the fly. Having the feature supported or the functionality allowing you to pull values from your environment variable will also give people a path to be able to deal with values that is not non-string. So basically, if you know that you will be reading or need to read a value from the environment variable, that you need to assign it to a parameter, but this is like a Boolean or non-string time, you would still expect you would still be expected to do the type conversion on your own because the read environment variable will always return a string or null to indicate if this environment variable that you was trying to read value from is actually not available on the machine where you're running your Bicep code from. So this would be the proposed syntax in case you needed to do any type conversion for the values that you have been reading from your environment variable. Also, because of the null return of the helper, you could easily set default values. So in case you are trying to read a value from the environment variable, but the value is not there, so you know that this might or might not exist, you could use the same syntax applicable in the rest of the Bicep param files and be able to say if this, doesn't equal null, you could use a value from my variable, my environment variable. If it does equal null, then here is my default for the value that I can set for this param. And eventually, one other thing that we want to highlight is while this feature will enable you to basically support endless cases, for example, it should ease being able to pass values that gets generated on the fly, either in your CI/CD cases, passing different values based on the VM you're using or whatever. So the possibilities are actually endless, but we want to highlight that if you choose to use this functionality to read some sensitive data that like a password or something that you are securely storing in an environment variable, you have to make sure that you decorate the parameter when you define it in the main Bicep file with secure param, with a secure decorator before your param, because this will ensure that the value wouldn't be leaked and will be following the same rules that is being, applied for any other parameter once you use a secure decorator on it. So this is the highlight of the proposed syntax, the feature and the functionality that it will come with this. The issue, this is the link for the issue on GitHub. Please, if you have any feedback or discussion, make sure that you share the use cases you have on the discussion as well. We'll keep the discussion going there. And finally, I just want to show like a side-by-side look of how this would be. So this is like a very basic dummy Bicep module that I built. And you see here that I'm identifying a param that is supposed to be my password. So I know that this is something that's sensitive. So I have used the decorator, the secure decorator, to ensure that the value wouldn't be leaked anywhere in my deployment. But then you see that in the Bicep param file, where I am actually reading the value, I make sure that when I do it, I'm reading the value from the environment variables using this helper. So that is basically the proposal we have. I know that this addressed a comment that has come earlier in the call regarding being able to read values, secure values or credential values. So I hope that will give a pass for people to enable some of those cases. Again, please keep in mind that you will need to use your carefulness when you are using this feature, so you're not exposing any values that you shouldn't be exposing. And also, please share the feedback if you have any on this feature or what your thoughts are as well.
Cool. Thank you, Hadwa. Anybody have any questions or thoughts? Oh, there is one question. Whit asked if the null coalescing operator would be useful as a fallback, so the question mark operator.
I think it will be available. I will need to double check that. This is we are still at the syntax proposal, but I can double check that. Or if Anthony can like chime in if you want and have an answer for this question as well.
Anthony, do you remember if we're going to, I think we will support the null coalescing operator in the initial release.
I mean, if not, I guess it's sort of covered in just the ternary value in the third option on this slide. But that's a little lengthy.
Yeah, sorry. We should be. I mean, the null coalescing operator is already supported, and we support expressions in params files. So my expectation is that it'll be there already.
Right.
Let's see here. If we set a default like this for @secure with the linter stop telling us that we shouldn't have default values for secure params. I don't know if I'm following that one, Taylor, because isn't it still not a good idea to have a default value for secure parameters?
Well, thank you. If the proposal here is that you would set param sensitive equals read environment variable, that goes against the idea of not having a default value for a sensitive parameter. I'm just concerned because we're talking about linter settings and all that stuff, so this is kind of counter to that.
So setting the default values, remember that this functionality is not just tied to be able to read sensitive information. You could basically use it to read any values that you know is dynamically generated for you, either from the CI/CD process or that you know it's changing. So if you're reading an environment variable that to fill a param that you know it is secure, then you shouldn't be setting a default. But if you are reading the value for a param that you know it's not secure, it will be okay to follow like a syntax, like in this case. You basically check if it's null, then you use what you have, or else you set your own default.
Okay, I think I was out of context. This is for setting it in the param file rather than in the actual bicep file. So you can ignore my statement. Thank you.
Got it. Makes sense, Taylor. Thanks. If the environment variable is not set, will the deployment fail or will it read as empty?
That was the whole debate over whether does it return null when it's empty, I think is the whole question about the double question operator too.
The proposal is to return null if the variable was not available or didn't exist.
Okay, cool. So it won't necessarily fail depending on how everything is being handled, but I think effectively it does mean that it will fail if we read it in as null.
Yep.
Cool. Any last questions? Okay. The next one, there's two from Anthony. The first one is VS Code deployment pane UI prototype.
Yeah. Okay. Let me share. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. So this is just something I've had on a branch in a while. I built a prototype for it a while back, and it's kind of been sitting there. So I wanted to just show it to people and get some gauge interest, see if people would like it, or otherwise I can just get rid of the branch. Yeah. So I mean, basically, what I found when I was using the extension is that the deploy functionality we have today is very powerful. Like it's very useful to be able to just quickly deploy a bicep file, test things out, make sure you have your expressions correct, or run pre-flight. But we're kind of limited by the lack of UI that the VS Code gives you. So I kind of, based on the visualizer code that we currently have, I did some prototyping. And I basically created this deploy pane, which you can bring it up with a similar button to the visualizer, and kind of like work with your bicep file on the left and make changes on the right, and just kind of like have a bit of a quicker dev test loop in terms of like, so for example, I can fill in a storage account name, put a location in. Let's just pick a storage account name that's not going to work. Actually, sorry, I think I have to. Oh, I think I already am logged in. So if we hit validate here, you can kind of instantly get feedback about, what's wrong. It's a prototype, so things are a little bit rough right now. The UI is obviously leaves a little bit to be desired. And sorry, I'm just going to let my dogs out because they keep making noises. Yeah, so the main goal really is just to have something that you can get kind of quicker feedback for, and you can make changes and it'll kind of pick up your changes in real time. So for example, I can flip this to true and everything will be updated in real time. I can turn defaults on or off. I can validate, I can also deploy, I can link it to parameters files. I think just having a dedicated UI for this gives you a lot more kind of flexibility in the UI choices you give people. The other thing I also did is kind of building on top of the Bicep parameters file. I'm just going to revert my change there. Linking it to the Bicep parameters file. So again, like I've got a parameters file that's invalid. I've got a storage account name that contains a dash. I've got a region name that doesn't make any sense. I can hit validate and I can see the errors immediately. I can go and fix those errors. Hit validate again and kind of like, just speed things up as much as possible when I'm trying to just play around with my parameters and play around with my expressions. And again, I can also deploy this file. So this is a bit of a weird scenario. It's deploying a storage account and then a second storage account, which I've deliberately set up to fail. So I can hit deploy here and we can get like instant feedback about what's actually happening. Well, when I say instant, kind of instant-ish. We've got a storage account create operation going on. You can see the current state of it. I think this is just polling every 10 seconds at the moment, so it's not super up to date, but yeah, hopefully it should refresh once this completes. And I've created this parameter to basically, if I set it to true, it's going to fail the template deployment. So that's succeeded. I can see my storage account operations that took place as part of the deployment. I've got my output from the output I put into the file here. And then if I decide to fail the deployment just for the sake of showing what it looks like, this is going to basically pass some invalid data into the template. Hit deploy again, and then this time around we should get a failure. So yeah, like I said, the UIs are kind of rough, but we can see our resource deployment failure here, and we've got the message coming back. So yeah, I'll put a link into the chat just for the issue. I really just wanted to like have a chance to show it in front of people and collect feedback on it and see if people liked it or if people had suggestions. So yeah, that's really all I had.
Everyone hates it, Anthony. Nothing but negative feedback in the chat.
Do you have an issue about anywhere that we could share some feedback on?
Yeah, I'll put a link in the chat. And I haven't updated the branch in a while, but I will update the branch and get a build so that people can actually test with it as well. But I'll put a link to the issue in the chat. Just give me a second. Yeah, there are some questions about scope and logging in. That is the kind of rougher parts of this prototype right now. It's currently limited to just resource scope, and logging in is a bit of a pain because you have to log in every time. So I think there are quite a few improvements to be made here. Really, I just kind of wanted to build out the minimum just to see what the experience will be like. So yeah, any feedback would be useful in that issue. That is everything I had.
Any burning thoughts beyond praise that anybody wanted to share with Anthony?
I mean, I did it in the comments, but I guess I can on the issue as well. But something that would auto-generate deployment names, even if it's just incrementing a suffix onto the end, would be fantastic. Especially since so often I'll deploy something, it breaks, I delete the resource group, but you can't reuse the deployment names until all the resources, or at least that deployment's deleted. So I'll just start deleting it while I've made the change. Want to redeploy, need to increment the variable name, it'd be fantastic if I could just check a box and it would just do that for me.
Well, the current deployment does that already, right?
The
I think
current bicep
I've always had
deploy.
to specify it. I use the command line. So
It's
I'm
an
not sure.
art to get your resource names in Bicep all correct and unique enough that you can run your script twice like that.
Yes.
But in the registry repo, we try most of our modules work pretty well for that, but we don't end up incrementing. You just kind of deploy back over the deleted resources, but you shouldn't run into those like unique name stuff. But it's an art.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Cool. We
also,
are.
would it persist? Okay. Will it persist between Visual Studio loads?
Currently, no, but I feel like that's a solvable problem.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. We are 1 minute over. Anthony, you just want to call out anything about user-defined functions, or do you want to leave it for next time?
Yeah, I kind of ran out of time to prepare that. I think it may be released under an experimental feature flag in the next Bicep release. It may not. I'm not 100% sure on that yet. If it is, then we'll put information in the release notes.
Okay, cool. Obviously, we don't have time for Q&A. There was one requested update that I don't think we talked about in the future releases slides on Azure AD lookups. So be able to give the principal name to Azure AD in Bicep somehow, and then get the object ID back for a variety of scenarios that require object IDs. We think we should be able to enable that with the upcoming Microsoft Graph provider that's going to be released in July. It may not.
So Alex,
yeah.
Alex, sorry to interrupt. I just confirmed with the Graph team. So turns out they won't support user in the first iteration. There will be support for app. So just want to clarify that.
Okay, makes sense. So the foundation will be there to enable it. It might not be there in the first release, but we will definitely be able to get to it at some point. Okay, thank you all who are still on the call. Thanks everyone for joining as always, and we will fill out the feedback for Bicep parameters. I'll put another link to it, and we will see you all next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
See you, everyone.
Bye.